Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at earth tones, and I have several earth tone paints that I'm going to mix. We're going to sit down and we're going to try and mix some of these colors and see what can we do with these colors. Now, earth tones have been used for years, and for oil painters this is basically like the foundation in establishing your painting, because earth tones tend to dry much faster. But in acrylic paintings it really doesn't matter, but it still works out very well. So today I'm going to use all of the earth tone paints that I have, and you can use any of the earth tone paints that you have. Don't go out and buy anything new. Most likely in your sets you'll have a number of different earth tones that you can use. Just happen to have a nice little range of earth tones. So today we're going to push some paint around and see what we can do. I'm going to make a little chart, and you can do the same thing. You can try the same thing, because it's always good. You can always use the chart again to help you when you're painting. You can always go back and use it as a reference. So I'm going to use that. I brought a small 8x10 pad, canvas pad, so that that's what I'm going to use to do a lot of these charts and things like that. So let's dive in right now. Let's quickly want to show you this book I have. This is like the history of color. And just by going through this, they go through each pigment, where they came from. We're just going to quickly go into the inside. You can see like a lot of the older artists had to start with pigments in these bottles, and then they had to grind them down. Pigments are found all over the world. So here they're from Australia, and there's certain pigments you can see that in their natural state in rock formation. Here, this one is taken from additives taken from insects, from cactus leaf, and that was used for red. This is some of the old masters. They use basically earth tones with a little bit of red. Those colors were pretty expensive because colors were coming from all over the world. Here, let's see, this artist, this person is from Calcutta. You can see some of the pigments. So some of the pigments, people will ask, why are the pigments so expensive? That's because the pigments have to come from different places. Here's one from Afghanistan, and you can see like the blue, like the here, lapis blue. So a lot of these different pigments, they come from natural state, and they come from all over the world. So that's why some of them, when you go to the store, they may be a little bit more expensive. So I made a little layout, and what I'm going to do, the top boxes right here, I'm just going to take the paint straight out of the tube and apply them right here. And you probably may be wondering why I have that diagonal line going through. I want to see what the natural characteristics of the paint looks like. So when I apply it, if that line will show through, then I know that that paint is a little bit translucent. If it doesn't show through that much, then I know that the paint is a little bit more opaque. And I put down the names of the browns that I'm going to be using, the earth tones. So I have yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, and burnt umber. And then I'm going to mix it with white all the way across. Then I'm going to mix it with yellow ochre all the way across with each one of these combinations. Then I'm going to use blue, and I'm going to mix them all the way across. And then black will make a shade. And then I may just go ahead and just for myself, I want to try cad yellow across, and then cad red with these mixtures going down, and see what kind of color combinations. This is always good to do for yourself. If you have like a small pad, you can do this on paper. I just happen to have one of those small. So the first thing I'm going to do now is just add the browns down right out of the tube. No mixing and no adding. I'm not going to add water to it. So here are the colors right out of the tube. So I have my yellow ochre, I have the raw sienna, I have the burnt sienna, raw umber, and burnt umber. Now I'll try to bring it up close so you can take a look. There's a little difference. It's kind of hard to see when the colors when they're darker. It's hard to distinguish between them. But you'll notice when I add white to them, you'll see the characteristics to show up a little bit. Okay, so here they are laid down next to one another. You could see quickly that the yellow ochre tends to be a little bit translucent. This raw sienna seems to be a little bit translucent. Usually the burnt sienna is a little bit more translucent than this, but the paint's old, right? So that it's kind of, the paint that I'm using is not as translucent. It's like semi-opaque. And the raw umber has a little bit of translucency to it, whereas the burnt umber seems to be a little bit more opaque. So we're going to try now and mix white to each one of these colors and see what their characteristics look like when you mix them with white. So let's take a look at that now. So what I'm going to do first, I'm just going to put down a little bit of white, and I'm just going to put in and bring a little bit of that color into the white, because we always mix from the light. We start with the light color and then mix the dark colors into the lights. So let's try that. So what I did on my palette, I just put little dabs of white underneath each one of these colors, and I'm just going to drag a little bit of the yellow ochre into the white. Use my palette knife. It's easier to clean the palette knife in mixing. I'll put a little bit more. This is why it's good to just start with the light color and mix it in, because you can always add a little bit more gradually into the pigment. If I work the other way around, and you can see sometimes, like, if your paint is cheap, you can get it one good white and use that. Okay, so here's my yellow ochre with white. Try to see if I can keep them relatively. So a lot of times people are trying to work like flesh tones. This is why, like, a lot of the old masters, when they were working their flesh tones, they basically could use these earth tones to create it. Now, like even this burnt sienna, you see now how red that is. I always call that, it's like my dark red. Now let's see what happens here. This is the raw umber. And then the last one, the burnt umber. Let's see what happens with the burnt umber. There are different burnt umbers. Like this one, just looking at it, seems to be on the warm side. They also have a burnt umber that they call on the green side, like they call it a burnt umber green shade. So both of these make for some nice grays, nice warm grays. So here we go. Okay, so I have my colors out mixed, and they won't dry. So now I'm going to just go ahead and lay them out here in the chart and see what they look like. So now you can see what they look like when you see those different colors when they're mixed with white. So now I'm going to take and mix the yellow ochre. Now of course the yellow ochre is just going to be yellow ochre, but we'll see what it looks like when it's mixed with raw sienna, when it's burnt umber, when it's mixed with the raw umber, and then what it looks like when it's mixed with the burnt umber. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that. I did the same thing here on the palette. I just brought down the yellow ochre down here, and then doesn't really matter. I shouldn't even bother there. But I'm going to mix this. I'll bring this over into this one, bring this into this one, to this one, and then we'll lay it down on the palette. Here are my colors now mixed with the yellow ochre. The yellow ochre by itself doesn't matter, but so let's see. Maybe some of these combinations might end up looking like some of the other combinations. So I'm going to just fill this in right now, and then we'll come back and look at it. Okay, so here's what they look like when they're mixed and they're laid out on the canvas. You can see, well, this is neutral. This one just a little bit warmer by adding the raw sienna and then mixing those two together. Same here. It seems like it makes for a nice color change with the burnt sienna, other than using white, because sometimes you can use yellow instead of using white to lighten something. Here, this is interesting because this makes for the raw umber and the yellow ochre make for a nice deep green, olive type deep green. So that would make this would be very good for a landscape. And this is also kind of interesting because this seems to be the burnt umber with the yellow ochre made for a nice warm, almost looks like burnt sienna a little bit, but burnt sienna is very red. You can see how red that is. So it's interesting to see the characteristics and see how they change. So now we're going to use blue because I want you to see what happens here. I very seldom do I use black. I usually mix my black. So when we get over to these two colors, you're going to see that you can get some very deep colors by adding blue to them. So let's take a look and see what happens there. Okay, since the blue is it's pretty dark, I'm going to mix the blue into these colors here, and you'll see the change. I can still use some of the paint that's on my palette, and then also I want you to see what the characteristics look like when I mix this blue into these two, and the nice darks that you'll be able to get. So let's take a look now and see what happens. So you can see right now that this green, the yellow ochre with the blue made a nice green. Here it made a nice interesting green too. This is more on the purple side, and this is like a nice dark, and this is another nice dark. It's almost black, and this is like a lot of painters would use burnt umber and ultramarine blue to make their blacks because they make for interesting blacks. So instead of just being a flat black, which some artists call it like a dead color. So we'll see when we mix the black with the color and see what happens. Just out of curiosity, I want to see what happens when I mix white with some of these colors that I just mixed. That's why you have so many different color combinations that you can come up with. I'm just going to mix it on in my sketchbook. I'm going to lay them down on my sketchbook and let's take a look. Okay. So I wanted to try something a little bit. So this row right here is all of the top colors with the blue added to them, and this is what happens. And then I wondered what would they look like if I added white to the colors this row, if I add white to them, and they produce some very nice grays, some beautiful grays, like a nice green gray, like this nice warm gray. This is almost like a purplish gray, you know. This is all like a blue gray, and you would think that this was made from black, but no, it's not. So the next row, I will mix black with the color. So they usually call that a shade, you know, when you mix the color with a black, you mix it into a shade. And then I'll try the yellow and red, and we'll see what happens. So with the black is an extremely strong color. So it takes very little. You just use very little black into the colors, and you can see already that the black and the yellow ochre makes for a nice green. So I'm going to lay that down, and I'm just going to go ahead and mix the black into each color, but use it sparingly. Usually, like, black goes such a long way, and so does red. now when you look at them, the row with the blue and the row with the black, they're pretty close. That's why a lot of artists they just go ahead and use ultramarine blue and mix the colors, because look what you can do here in this row, and look what this looks like in this row. They're pretty close. Now it could be that the black has a little bit of bluish tone to the black to cause it to do some of this, because oftentimes I'll use the black, and I'm using a lot of artists like to use black, like ivory black, because it's a little bit more translucent. It's easier to mix. It's not so overpowering. So I'm just going to fill in the other two rows. You don't have to watch me mix paint to do these two, just so you can see what they look like. These same colors would look like if I mixed them with red, and if I mixed them with yellow, and then I'll kind of like finish off this chart. So you can see how valuable the making of a chart is, and although I've been painting for many years, I can go back now and reflect on this. This tells me a lot. This gives me a lot of information, especially about the characteristics. When we look at the top and seeing the characteristic of the paint, and then seeing what happens when we mix white to the paint. A lot of people were trying to figure out different skin tones, and here they are throughout this chart. So here, yellow ochre, and you can see how that looks when you mix it with the paint. Then with blue, you can see how the colors, how they mix with blue. And then with these colors here and that blue line, mixing them with white and seeing how the beautiful grays that you get with that mixture. And then here, this line here was black with the original colors at the top. You can see the different colors. They almost look like this line of the blues. And then the added colors that I added here, the same colors using the basic color, these earth tones at the top, mixing them with red and seeing the combinations that you can get. And then also mixing them with yellow and seeing the different type of combinations that can be received. So for our class, our challenge is to work with the earth tones, and there's a lot more range and combinations that you can use within this structure here. But by using the earth tones, you'll keep a nice harmony of colors as those colors work together. Hopefully you'll take the challenge and produce some interesting paintings using the earth tones as your foundation.